So here's our better strategy. Our better strategy might be to solve these quadratic equations by factoring. So if we look at this equation, let's factor it. So it's a trinomial. Hey, there's Lucky. He said hi again. Did you hear him? Oh, there he is. So let's factor x squared plus 4x plus 4. Two things that multiply to get 4 and add to get 4 are positive 2 and positive 2. So the way that we go about solving this is if you have two things, these are two factors being multiplied and the answer is 0. So two things that are being multiplied and the answer is 0. What you know is either this first thing you're multiplying has to be 0 or this has to be 0. Because if you multiply two things, you get 0. One of them is going to have to be 0. We don't care which one. We don't know which one. So we just go x plus 2 could be 0. It just so happens that these are the same exact factors, which, x plus 2 equals 0. So now we solve it. What would make this 0? Subtract 2, and x is negative 2. And same thing here. And this is actually called a double root. Negative 2 is a double root. So there is our solution. So what we would know about the related function is that the graph of this function crosses the x-axis at negative 2. So there's only one solution. So what we could think about is that this graph, if you looked at the picture of its graph, would have its vertex probably at negative 2. Because that's the situation where there's only one solution. There's two here, but it's the same solution. So let's look at this one. So first what we do is get our equations equal to 0. So we need 8x squared plus 10x, and then minus 3 equals 0. So get it equal to 0, and then we factor. So that's our first step to solve by factoring. Get the equation equal to 0. This one already was. So here we have it equals 0. Now factor. So this is a trinomial. The coefficient is 8. So we have 8x squared plus blank x plus blank x minus 3 equals 0. So we need two things that multiply to get negative 24 and add to get positive 10. And my brain immediately goes to 6 and 4, but that won't work because it has to multiply to get negative 24. And so it's going to be negative 2 and positive 12. So when we add them, we get positive 10. Multiply, we get negative 24. So I'll put my negative 2 here and my 12 here. And we factor by grouping. So we can factor out a 2x, and we're left with 4x minus 1. And then over here, factor out a 3, and we're left with 4x minus 1 equals 0. So our final factored form ends up being 4x minus 1 times 2x plus 3, and it's equal to 0. Set each factor equal to 0, 4x minus 1 equals 0, or 2x plus 3 equals 0. Solve this. Add 1 to both sides. So we have 4x equals 1. Divide by 4. So x is 1/4. Or subtract 3, and we have 2x equals negative 3. And divide by 2, and x is negative 3/2, which is negative 1 1/2. So if we think about the graph of this would be one of those, if we were solving by graphing, our answers would be, well, x is between 0 and 1, and negative 1 and 2. We couldn't be accurate, but because of factoring, we can be accurate. Just a quick look at the last one. This we try to factor it, two things that multiply to get -7 and add to get -5 or +5, there isn't anything. We can't factor this. So this factoring method doesn't work here. So we need another method. And that's actually where we're going to go into using the quadratic formula in the next day. So solve by graphing, graph it, find the x-intercepts, or solve by factoring. Factor the equation, set each factor equal to 0, and solve. That's it. Talk to you later.